So very warm welcome. Um, Welcome back. Yesterday, Adi Turiya, director of the Aeon Center of Cosmology, invited us to look beyond political history and explore partition through a cosmological lens. And today's podcast in our Truth and Reconciliation Work Week 2026 is titled India, a Convergence of Time, Space, and Destiny. And I'm your host, Nilima Bhatt, and I'd like to stay with one of the most profound symbols in that journey, Kashmir, and explore what it can teach us about India's past, present, and possible future. It's going to be a fun conversation. It's one that I've been waiting for a very long time, ever since I met Adi and the whole team in their center near Kodaikanal. And I had come across this book by Patricia Norelli Bachelet. And it literally kind of, came into my face here at a bookshop walk in Pondicherry. And I was so struck because for the past few years, I've been deeply drawn to Kashmir as a ground of truth and reconciliation that is needed for themselves and then for India and for the rest of the world, right? So this book is titled Kashmir, a Convergence of Time, Space, and Destiny. And I was so struck by the it's an audaciously ambitious title, and it takes a lot to have called a book that. I mean, obviously the person who writes from that level is someone we need to listen to. So Patricia described Kashmir in that book as a convergence of time, space, and destiny. And for those who are still absorbing yesterday's session, where Adi Turiya took us through partition of India through a cosmological lens. So Adi, could you help us understand what she meant by that? You know, when she said Kashmir is a convergence of time, space, and destiny. And why does Kashmir occupy such a pivotal place in India's civilisational story? So that's a grand opening for you, Adi. Over to you.
Thank you, Nilima, and thank you for bringing us into this week, this important, these dialogues that you're having with everyone on truth and reconciliation. And yeah, ever since you came here, we've been looking forward to this moment. So I'm very happy to be here. And yeah, namaskar. So that's a great place to start. This title is, like you said, it invokes a very vast vision. And so what is she meaning by this convergence of time, space, and destiny? And I'll try to just walk us briefly into this because it largely revolves around time. And this entire dialogue is going to really be examining time as a reality, how time can impact events and our alignment with time, and how fundamental that actually is to India's dharma and her destiny and her purpose. So normally when we think about time, if we even think about time, when we experience time, we feel like it's this linear movement from the past through the present into the future, and we're just kind of riding along on this wave of the moments passing along. But when we go a little bit deeper, we find that time is always unfolding in cycles. So whether it's the breath, our heartbeats, the day, the year, the movements that our life goes through, it's always unfolding in cycles. And one of the ways we're reminded of this in Indian culture is the myths. Thea often said, I refer to Patricia as Thea often. That was the name the mother gave to her. And she referred to myth as recurring history, like an it's a form of history that is eternally recurring, because the events in the myths are features of universal human experience that are always coming up in our evolutionary cycles. And that's just one example of how what we seems like just a linear movement of time is actually an arc along a cycle. And when we go even deeper, all the lines, so part of this idea of convergence is a convergence inward of the consciousness to a point. And when we penetrate into that bindu, that seed point, we actually find that the past, the present, the future are all coexistent in that point. And actually, the entire cycle can be seen and experienced in its wholeness. And so, this point, this convergence to a point, is where the destiny is held. And from that seed, it unfolds through these cycles. But the destiny itself is through the convergence held in that point. And when it does move into the manifestation, it's always drawing into orbit around itself all the elements it needs to fulfill its purpose. And that movement orients itself around an axis. And the reason I'm going here is because this axis, whether we look at a galaxy or our own body, everything in nature arranges itself around a central axis. And for India, this axis, they called it the spine of the nation. It runs straight through the center of the subcontinent. And it's the same meridian that was traditionally used that passes through Ujjain. And it also passes through Kashmir. So this central line around which all of the energies of India is organized is on the subtle level this axis that also passes through Kashmir. So Kashmir itself has a very central position. And more than that, it's at the very crown of India. So this puts it both in its central aspect, but also at the topmost position. It's in a very sensitive position. It's also in a position that whatever happens there kind of radiates out and influences the whole nation. And it's really a region that's been most severely affected, as you know, by this whole process of partition. And that's partly because of how central it is along this energy line that, it's the axis of India's entire energy body, you can say.
I actually feel it's like not just a vertical axis. I also see it as a horizontal axis because through the ancient Silk Route, Kashmir has connected Central Asia, all the way from China on this side to, Japan, China, and, overland all the way to Persia and Mesopotamia and all the way beyond to even Egypt, right? So it's a very interesting, it sits on the cross, at the center of that cross. So I see it as having an even more, like there are other things, on the vertical axis, but Kashmir also sits on a horizontal axis, the way I sense it. And I feel it's like sitting in the churn and it holds that bindu because it's in the center of a cross. Right?
Yeah, and those two axes serve different functions. Like the vertical one is the stabilizing axis, and then the horizontal field is what churns, like you were just saying. Yes. And the influences come from the east and the west, and they move through this region. Yeah.
Yeah. So moving on. So therefore, partition through a cosmological lens, right? Your work suggests that the partition of India was not simply a political accident, but revealed something much deeper about India's evolutionary journey. So what does a cosmological perspective reveal that conventional history cannot? And how does it change the way we understand both partition and the continuing challenge of Kashmir? Could you go deeper into that?
Love to. I think the first thing to see is that everything that happens in our life or in the world it's an outcome of an inner condition. So whatever the condition of our mind or our emotions, these are the things that are then going to manifest in the world, as the events that we see playing out. And what cosmology, an applied cosmology, as they called it, such as what we find in the Rig Veda, gives us a lens or a view into the underlying causal energies that are at play influencing the events. So it gives us insight into the more causal dimension of what's happening in the world. And it also gives us kind of a map or a framework so we can find our place within that wider perspective, these cycles that I was mentioning, how that seed unfolds through a cyclical process, and cosmology, an applied cosmology that includes the human experience and is concerned with, let's say, finding our place within the cosmos. So you can compare it to a scientific cosmology, right? Which just examines, okay, how old is the universe or whatever. An applied cosmology is based on the unfolding of consciousness. And this is the Indian perspective, the Vedic perspective. So it exposes those underlying causal factors. It also helps us find our place within a broader context. And basically, when it comes to partition, it helps us frame it in a larger context. So we're not getting caught up in the events, but we're really looking at what led to this situation. And if we can find the cause, maybe we can address what that's actually telling to us.
Speaking of underlying invisible causal factors that impact a land, I've also heard that wherever there is sapphire underneath the ground, that energy, the stone is called Neelam. It holds a kind of truth vibration that is of such a high order that until the land and the people that live on this ground that has sapphire underneath, until they live aligned with the truth of the sapphire vibration, the light of the sapphire, the truth light, the blue light, they will not know peace, that it's kind of their cross to bear. Have you heard that?
That's a powerful prophecy.
Well, because you do know there is sapphire underground in Sri Lanka, I'm told also in Palestine. So, it did strike me on the top of the nation in Kashmir and then on the southern tip in Sri Lanka, both sides. It's like India has a destiny to hold the vibration of consciousness and pure consciousness and blue light, the truth light. And what a responsibility, because it's like no lesser truth is allowed to remain for any period of time. It will be shaken out until truth is achieved, and until true harmony is arrived at. So wow, that's some destiny to have to live into, right? I mean, I don't know if you'd heard this piece before. I thought I should add it for our listeners here. So coming to the drift from the Vedic vision that you were talking about on your presentation yesterday. So one of the most striking ideas in Thea's work is that India gradually drifted from her Vedic foundations, creating what she called gaps in the body of the mother. So could you explain what gaps mean, right? And how did that drift make events such as partition possible? Explain the symbol here and even the energetics.
Sure. Yeah, this is a big one. And just to name it, what we're talking about is the difference between the Sayana, or the earth-based system, and the Nirayana, or the star-based system of organizing society in time around the sacred events that happen throughout the year. So in the Vedic cosmology was based on that convergence to a point, which is the earth at the center, and it's the individual soul embodied on the earth. And this in turn, this convergence of time and space shows up as those solstices and equinoxes that basically anchor and stabilize that movement, just like we spoke about earlier, where that central axis allows everything to come into place that's needed in the dynamic movement of things. So those solstices and equinoxes provide a stabilization of the movement. And those are what basically punctuate the rhythm of these unfolding cycles, is these moments of perfect alignment, like you were just saying, where in these places where we're called to actually live up to this high ideal of the nature of Bharat Mata, this destiny that she has to manifest that truth. Those cosmic alignments of the earth and the sun and its alignment with the cosmos are real powerful gateways that the rishis used very effectively to bring in the whole of society into this process, this process of manifesting the truth in life. So let's, compare that to in the stars, there is no center, there's no whereas the earth was the center in the Vedic worldview, you can't point to a star and center everything around that. In fact, there's not one Nirjana system, there's dozens of them, because they each choose a different star, to use as their reference. And the light of each of those stars takes hundreds of years to get here. It's not a directly connected axis that we can align our soul energies with, for example, in the way that the earth is. And I mean, in essence, you could say there's no unifying essence in those distant stars. They're obviously part of our neighborhood, like they're where the earth is located and embedded within. But the difference between these, it's more extreme than night and day, because in the one, all of the lines, all of the threads of consciousness draw inwards to this central point through a process of inner alignment. And in the other, the consciousness basically diffuses into the vastness of space, and there is no more center. And even the four directions then become disconnected from the earth. If these Nirjana systems, they imagine that somehow, east and west and north are drifting along with the stars. It unhinges the whole earth-centeredness of the Vedic system, or cosmological culture that India grew out of. Veda is really at the root of all of this. So in the Nirjana system, we're really left without that stabilizing axis. There's no center that holds, as they often said, there needs to be a center that holds. In the Nirjana system, there's no center, there's no axis. It's all arbitrary and kind of disembodied. And so there's no way of that seed of the destiny to draw to itself all those things that it needs to realize its full potential. And when that's lacking, all that a body can do is basically fall apart. And that's what we've been seeing over these last several centuries, is a slow kind of breaking apart, fragmentation, disaggregation, and in the most extreme case, this partition that took place that cut, it almost feels like it cut through our heart, like how deep that slice went. But it's from this perspective that Thea wrote about, it's all an outcome of this loss of that central alignment and that axis that allows everything to harmonize itself.
I'm getting a very interesting analogy that, they say when the soul leaves the body, if there is still like a thin silver thread And as long as that connection is there, the soul can always come back in. Like in our dream time and all the astral travel, we go out of, but we can always come back in. And if by chance that thread gets cut, then you've separated the soul from the body, and then that's death, right? So what you're describing feels like something happening at a planetary scale, that as long as the earth was connected to the solstices and the equinoxes, it had a portal open to the divine energies. And now that it's reoriented to an outer set of stars, it doesn't have its own center connected to anything anymore. It's kind of down the path of dying, right? And yeah. So does this also apply to the rest of the planet, or is it only about India?
Well, it's really interesting because India is the only nation that has gone down this path of disconnecting from the solstices and the equinoxes and following a more transcendental orientation. And I think I'd like to talk more to this when a little later. I think we'll get into it, but it is really something that's unique to India because it has chosen or carved out this path for itself where, like we talked a bit about yesterday, if you were there, the first step was actually a spiritual movement of transcendence, and the calendar followed after. They're connected, but it was first of all this movement towards transcending the earth and transcending the need to even be born on earth again, and that is unique to India. It's a really remarkable feature of the Indian culture, and it's not in itself a bad thing. The difficulty is these repercussions that it has led to in terms of the loss of that central axis. And I love that image you brought of that silver thread, because that's kind of where we're at. It's like there still is, they actually called it a golden thread. There still is that silver thread or that golden thread that links us to this centermost point. But it is kind of getting thinner and thinner. It's getting more and more tenuous. And the question is really, how far can it go?
Okay, so that brings me to the deeper question that India has so much genius and, Jyotish and Vedic astrology. And, we've been run on these frameworks and wisdom traditions for centuries, even millennia, as you said yesterday, Why did we veer off it 1,500 years ago? And how come we haven't yet realized that we should course correct? I mean, it's beyond me to comprehend that.
It's a bit mind-blowing for sure. But that's really the crux of the problem. There's a lot of cultural investment in this, system. All of the universities of Jyotish and just the practitioners and all of the temples. And it's like they're rooted in, I was reflecting a lot on this today in connection with the Sharda temple and the academy that surrounded it, and the time frame in which that took place. If you don't know, this was one of the most important academies of Sanskrit scholarship and literature and Indian culture and preservation of the traditions and promulgation of the knowledge. It was a really remarkable, for many centuries, it played a very key role in Indian culture.
Sharda Peeth, dedicated to the goddess Sharda, who is an aspect of Saraswati, the goddess of learning. So like Nalanda and Takshashila, Sharda Peeth was considered one of the greatest universities of its time, ancient.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And that was in Kashmir.
It was in Kashmir, in the valley, in what's now, occupied or administered territory. And I was reflecting on how it was really known for preserving all of these sacred texts and really devoted to the preservation and study of this culture that is encoded in all of this Sanskrit literature, the Puranas, the Siddhantas, like all of these really seminal, important texts. And like, that's amazing. And it contained the seed of its own undermining in this specific instance, because that's, for example, how the nakshatra system became fossilized at a point in time, is because it was just preserved in that form, and we've followed it ever since. And because the stars drift relative to the equinox, if we don't update and renew and observe the world around us and just follow the tradition blindly, that's what leads to these gaps, which is now 23 degrees. It's almost the full extent of India, that we've drifted away from that alignment.
So the question
So
therefore is,
you asked, how did this even happen? It's hard to even imagine, but here we are. Yeah.
And, I did share with you ahead of this call when we were discussing these ideas that some Jyotish, some people here would say the nakshatras add a certain nuancing to what the zodiac does, right? So that they can work together. Why does it have to be one or the other, right? So I can understand, if Indian astrologers decided to choose the nakshatra system over the zodiac, but I think that doesn't stop you from doing both, right? At an individual level.
It's not one or the other, but one of them moves relative to the other. So the question is, where do we anchor our consciousness and the civilization's energies? Do we anchor it to the earth and the alignments of the earth, or do we anchor it to Chitra or Jyeshta or some star that we choose to use as our reference? And if we go back and study the history of this, at a certain time, Rohini was on the vernal equinox, and so we used Rohini as the nakshatra of reference. In the Atharva Veda, it was Kritika, the Pleiades were on the vernal equinox, so they used that nakshatra was the head of the nakshatras. In the Puranic times, it was Ashwini, and today it's Bhadrapada. So the question is, do we adjust and align ourselves with the nakshatras and allow the nakshatras to align with the earth, or are we going to fixate on some distant point out in space somewhere? That's how I would, I guess, approach that question of how do they work together. But because they're constantly changing, they don't have a permanent meaning. They don't have Thea often said there's no knowledge content in the nakshatras, whereas the zodiac provides a language of the Vedic journey and the process of transformation of human consciousness. So perhaps the nakshatras provide some nuance, but it's a nuance that I'm not sure. It would either always be changing or what, is the question. But certainly they were the basis for observational astronomy, because when you look in the sky, it's the stars that you see. The moon each night goes from one nakshatra to the next. So they have their place, but they don't give us this alignment that is the very basis for Bharata Shakti and the unity of the soul of India.
So that's what I want to just, elaborate on for our listeners. The way I understand it is Bharat Shakti, the potency of this, the soul of India, is kept alive if the dates and the rituals and the festivals are all aligned and celebrated on the right zodiacal calendar, right? And it's that's when those portals are open between so-called heaven and earth. So if we are celebrating, say, Guru Purnima, on the day it should not be celebrated according to the zodiacal calendar, then we are not really receiving the portal. We're not really opening, we're not connecting, we're not observing the day and the ritual on the real day where the portal is open to the divine energies, right? Am I understanding this correctly?
Yeah, definitely. And Guru Purnima is an interesting example because it was, a month ago. But they often use the example of the Kumbh Mela, and she would often say, imagine the tremendous power that would be released if these millions of sadhus gathered on the solstice and sanctified that place at that time. The alignment would be like a lightning bolt that just, electrifies everything.
Mm.
And instead, I mean, there's always blessings. I mean, if you're sincere and you open to the devas and there's always blessings to be had. It's exactly what you said, though. There's these moments of alignment of the whole earth, towards the sun, for example, on the solstice, where it's like a gateway, and the Shakti just opens up, and there's this unique moment. And especially when it comes to the society as a whole, it's like if the whole society's energies are aligned into that moment, it's what made Indian civilization so long lasting. Like the genius of the Vedic rishis was to align the whole society's energies around these, cosmic alignments.
So we have a very detailed panchang, right? Every day of the month, my mother would look at the Kal Nirnay, as it's called in Maharashtra. And it's not just a calendar. It would say, it's this day of the moon and this day of the sun, or whatever, and is it a good day for what? And when do you celebrate which festival? And, there is these Ekadashis. It is so detailed. Those who follow it, that's because, as you say, we had our ancient seers who have left this very clear lifestyle for us, a spiritual way of being with nature and with the planets and with the solar system. And, they've left it for us. And there's a lot of India that follows it very seriously, maybe not so much the urban people, but, and now what you're saying to Thea's work is that they're doing all this serious practice, but they're doing it on the wrong days, according to what you're sharing, right? So
yeah,
it continues to blow my mind that after 1,500 years of so-called doing it on the wrong days, celebrating on the wrong days, why aren't we correcting this?
Partly because it was so gradual, because it was absolutely correct 1,500 years ago. It was like the exact perfect alignment, 1,500 years ago. And then it happens so slowly. It's 1 degree every 72 years. So in your entire lifetime, it only changes one day, that alignment. So in a human lifetime, we don't notice this. It only plays out over the long arc of a civilization. And that's why partition is such a poignant application of this knowledge, is because over the centuries, we see how things are falling apart, and we say, why is this happening? And this is Thea's diagnosis of the issue.
I'm just, the metaphor again is like a rubber band. It's been pulled, the drift you're saying, pulled until finally it snapped, right? And then that's the partition. Wow. So let's continue to build, go deeper into this. So beyond politics, India's destiny. When we speak about Kashmir today, the conversation almost always becomes geopolitical. Yet your work invites us to see India as a civilization with a larger evolutionary purpose. Also, Sri Aurobindo, who you follow, tells us that India is a goddess, Bhavani Bharti. So how does understanding India's true nature and divine agency and destiny change the way we approach questions of nationhood, borders, and reconciliation? What's the bigger story here, including the mistake of 1,500 years? What would that serve?
first of all, I agree fully that this nation, any true nation, is a soul. Okay, and maybe I would start actually by differentiating between nationhood and statehood. Okay, a nation is, every true nation has a soul, has a collective soul, a collective purpose and destiny. And India is one of the most conscious of these beings that populates the earth as nations. And this is in large part why partition was so devastating, is because this soul of India was on completely artificial lines severed into pieces. So it's still one soul, but these state lines, these borders were drawn according to completely superficial, reasons. And I mean, what to say? This is part of what boggles the mind, is how could that be allowed to happen? Like, if this being that is India, this goddess that is our mother, is a conscious being and is, directing her own growth through the ages, why would she choose to allow, like, why is that, the way she chose to unfold? It's a difficult question to grapple with.
Yesterday, you mentioned one interesting line. It's the ruse of the supreme, or some. Can you repeat that line?
I believe that's from the Puranas. I know it was Sri Aurobindo's statement that I think he was summarizing from one of the Puranas that is speaking about Buddha. Some people consider Buddha the ninth avatar, and others don't. The question is, if he was, and he had such a different poise and perspective and orientation than Hinduism in general engenders, this otherworldly transcendent, this view that the world is suffering. Like, this is, in the Veda, the world is nourished by soma, like bliss. It's like the substance of everything is just pure delight. And then to consider the idea that the world is suffering and we need to find a way to exit stage left is a very different view. So this idea that it's the ruse of the supreme, it was still like a divine intervention of sorts, but it functioned by negating the purpose of Vedic culture and Indian civilization, in a sense. And maybe the partition and everything connected with it is another example of and in general, the action of what Sri Aurobindo called the hostile forces is another example. We're often confronted with these extremely difficult situations that force the issue. They force the true thing to come forward and reestablish itself. And I guess that's how I would frame this question of why would the goddess choose this path of partition and such a difficult struggle between what is actually a single nation soul, that's now broken into pieces.
Yeah, could it be that it's to work out an even greater unification from this partition?
That's definitely my sense. Yeah, that's definitely my sense, is that because I mean, a lot of this revolves around the question of the place of Islam and the Muslim religion in India. A Muslim Indian is still an Indian. So how is that reconciled? That difference of view. But the soul of India, that soul that is the nation of India, one of the things that makes her so unique and amazing is that she holds all the diversities. Like, every religious idea that is ever even conceivable is held together within that oneness. If you want to conceive of the divine that's formless, that's true. The divine with form, that's also true. You know, there's room for every truth. So in the nature of India and the soul of this nation, there's room for, you know, Muslim belief and Muslim practices and all of these things. And I agree with you. I think this process, through the difficulty of confronting this partition that took place, is working out a larger harmony. And if it can be done in India, it heals something in the world. You know, if it can be done here, India is a place, it's almost as if all the world's difficulties are gathered in one place so that it can be worked out, you know. And if India can emerge victorious through that process, um, we were talking yesterday about the centrality of India. That's part of what makes India central to this process of transformation that the world is going through right now.
This is reminding me of the process of alchemy, that in order to turn base metal into gold, you have to first separate it into its constituent parts. Each one has to be distilled into its next level of purity before it can be reconstituted. And then it's reconstituted into a higher order version of itself. And yesterday's call with Dr. Alok Pandey was about India and world unity. And this was about India's spiritual destinies to work out human unity. Coincidentally, I'm also the global goodwill ambassador of one of the institutions the mother started called World Union. And it's Sri Aurobindo, one of his 5 dreams is it's a third dream, that the world will come together in some sort of a confederation, like a large, coming together, like where every nation becomes like an organ in a greater universal body, right? So if India, as you say, holds that centrality, then maybe this partition is part of a greater arc towards unification, even beyond the subcontinent, perhaps, right?
Yes.
That's huge, just to comprehend that. As you say, it took 1,500 years to get here. So who knows how many more 100 years before this reveals itself, you know, its deeper purpose of this brokenness reveals itself, or this drift. You know, if the drift too has a higher purpose and is not a mistake, you know, what if it's not a bug, but a feature of the design, as they say in the tech sector, right? So, wow, we now have language for these things. We can compare them to little things and we can kind of see this on this big arc. So keeping that kind of sense of hope and possibility, right? So reconciliation and the future. So Truth and Reconciliation Week this year asks how we heal inherited divisions. So from your perspective, what would reconciliation around partition and Kashmir actually require? Is it enough to resolve political disputes, or is something deeper being asked of humanity at this moment in history?
Yeah, I don't personally think the political disputes can be resolved on their own turf. I definitely lean towards the second part of your question, that there's something deeper that's asked for here. And I know, coming back to Kashmir, Thea wrote that entire book because she felt that the Kashmiri Pundit community could play a very central role in this process. They could actually take the lead in restoring this, connecting back to something you just said in terms of, you know, that 1,500-year arc, and maybe it's not a mistake. In a way, it wasn't, because they were simply preserving the traditions as they received it. You know, they were completely honoring and in integrity to the keeping these traditions intact. You know, it was like their sacred charge that they took this upon themselves. How can you say that's a mistake? You know, and yet it has resulted in this. You know, because that structure became fixated at that point in time, And now we're 1,500 years later, it has these repercussions. So Thea definitely felt that because the Kashmiri Pandit community was so central in, not to say that they're the only ones responsible or even that they're necessarily responsible in the first place, but because that was part of this process of calcifying or fixating the astronomical tradition of that time, they're in the position to rectify the situation. You know, if they understood what we're talking about tonight and agreed that, well, yes, you know, the solstice is really where that alignment unlocks the power of India's destiny. It sounds a bit like a very esoteric answer to this question, but that was Thea's view, is that simply by returning to the solstice is all of the other issues can resolve themselves, because India's soul will go through this resurgence. And all of these divisions are not to say they're not real, but they're not founded in a lasting truth. They're more on the surface, you know. And what? Because of that, I mean, what's coming to mind is the only thing that can be divided is the oneness, the indivisible oneness, because that's all that exists. So these divisions are always provisional. They often have a purpose, a temporary role to play in some kind of larger unfolding. But the division itself is not actually the real state of the world that we're living in, which is founded on oneness. It's a constant unfolding of this divine unity.
So just to clarify for our listeners,
Mm.
this whole panchang and this, you know, holding of the astrological calendar and so on, is it something the Kashmiri Pandit community has held for the whole country? I mean, why focus on them for you know, if they can change, but why are we asking it of them and not the rest of the country?
Well, I mean, there are panchangs that are rooted in different cultures within India. Certainly, they're not all coming from Kashmir. But touching back to where we started this conversation, that central and, you know, the crown chakra of India, you know, if a change is made there, it's going to radiate throughout the body. Just like when we receive that Shakti from above, it's like it comes through, you know, that's the medium of transmission, so to speak.
Got it. So, and just also for our listeners, India celebrates the return of the light from the 14th of January. It's called Makar Sankrant, and it's a solar event. So it's always happening on that date on the calendar. It's unlike lunar things. It doesn't shift, right?
It would have been January 13th. Well,
yeah,
you're saying it's the same date, but it's going to change every few decades because it's not
right
anchored to the solstice. That's the entire point.
Okay. But in my lifetime, I remember just seeing it as 14th of January, Makar Sankrant. But what you're saying, what Thea's work is saying is we have to go back, and if Kashmir can start creating a calendar starting from the solstice of December, which is typically around the 21st of December, right? And if the Kashmiri community started observing its rituals and you know, its spiritual life based on a panchang, a Vedic calendar that begins from the 20, you know, where it's anchored around the 21st of December, then somehow it'll open to those cosmic forces once again, and have that Shakti return to itself, to its soul, so to speak. Is that how I'm understanding? Am I right?
Yeah, I think it would send out shockwaves. It would really be a revolutionary move because this is so entrenched. You know, if they and really, I mean, there are panchangs that are published that follow the tropical year. But they are, they're smaller and they don't have a large following. My sense is that yes, if the Kashmiri Pundit community said, oh, we're making this change, this is the alignment, it would really shake India awake.
Wow. So we're going to speak with Ravinder Pandita ji on this Truth and Reconciliation Week. He's probably one of the foremost names today in the restoration of the Sharda temple and the pilgrimage to that Sharda temple, which is on the other side of, so yeah, I'll try and bring this up and let's hear his views. We have another lady, Ashima Kaul. She's also going to be a speaker. So because we have a lot of focus on Kashmir on this Truth and Reconciliation Week this year because of the focus on the partition of nations and specifically partition of India and Kashmir having taken such a big brunt of that. So we're kind of coming to the last couple of questions here. So reading the signs of our time, looking beyond India, do you see today's global conflicts and polarization as isolated crises, or are they expressions of the same deeper movement of consciousness that gave rise to partition? So what do these events tell us about where humanity stands today?
Yeah, there's no question that it's a global process at this point. And even if India has a unique position in that process, it's a worldwide thing that's happening. And the one way we can frame that, just kind of to take a step back, is that the Eastern and Western nations over, let's say, 2,000 years have taken very different tracks, very different lines of development. So in the West, there's been a real development of the material sciences and the mastery of material organization and technology and all of that. And in the East and in India especially, there's been this development of a very transcendental spirituality, like a very intensely focused concentration on the highest truth that can possibly be reached in human consciousness, and so India followed that line. And both of these lines were carried basically to their extremes. Okay, so in the West, we have this extreme materialism. In the East, we have this extreme spirituality that even sought to transcend the earth and embodiment. And basically in the last century or so, they're now coming into contact. They're now, coming, this emergence of a global culture, the communication that we're enjoying tonight, all these factors, everything's kind of getting thrown together and seeing how it combines. You were using the example of alchemy, and it reminded me of something the mother remarked, at least on one occasion. I think in different contexts, she would point this out. That even science carried to extreme and spirituality carried to extreme and then brought together and combined would not bring us to the full truth and would not be able to carry us forward. It's almost as if these two separate lines have brought us to this point, but they can't actually take us the next step. So she said there's a third thing that is needed, and that's what we're building. Like that's what she was working out in her yoga in the 60s at that time that she made these statements. And she also was very emphatic in that a new world has been born, a new world. She was fond of reminding us that we're all very privileged to actually be alive at this time, that a new world is coming into being. And so much of you can almost say everything that we say playing out on the world stage is actually remnants of this old world, this divided, material, spirituality, polarization, all these forms of polarization are manifestations of that old consciousness that is now falling apart. It's coming apart at the seams. It's nothing is supporting it anymore. It's turning into a big mess, you know. And this new world is that the mother spoke about is in our midst, and she invited us to enter into this collaboration, you know, with this new creation is really how she often presented it to us. And that's the opportunity here. Like we touched a little bit on this already, like these polarizations, these partitions are in place to enable a wider integration at this time. And it's a path that doesn't even have a precedent because, you know, spirituality as we know it can't bring us into this vision of oneness and wholeness and harmony where everything is allowed its place to unfold in its natural way. You know, this new world that many of us sense, but it's hard to see it because if we position our consciousness on the surface of things, it's not visible anywhere. It's still in its nascent, emergent stage, you know.
So that, you know, I'd invite you to therefore share a final reflection, you know, if you could leave us with one insight about Kashmir, India's destiny and humanity's future that you feel is most needed at this moment in history, what would it be? What do we have to do to connect with that new earth and that third force?
The way I would say it is that the earth itself is the field of our ultimate spiritual fulfillment. There's nowhere else to go. And this new world that we feel is possible is not only possible, but it's already here. And all we need to do is enter into contact with it through this process of inner alignment and this convergence towards a point, that point of destiny, that point of simultaneous time that is the point of the soul of each individual, of the nation, of the world. There's that centralmost point that is the divine presence within the heart of matter. I feel that's really the basis of this vision of oneness that is India's gift to the world.
That everyone reaches for their center, call it the soul, call it the divine spark within, everyone find their center. And that will take us into the new creation, the new world. That is the process. Each one finds their center.
Yes, and as we discussed, there's this collective process of aligning, you know, the whole social fabric into that same alignment. One of the beautiful parts of Vedic and Indian culture is how every member of such society was encompassed in this process of divine discovery. And you know, whether you're a yogi or whether you're just living your life, there's a potential to come into that alignment and to, you know, be part of this new creation.
There's so many different ways to say that, right? Like to come into alignment with your true purpose, to come into alignment with your higher self, to come into alignment with the true nature of reality, which is bliss or love, or right. So it just requires a shift in consciousness from uncentered, dualistic, polarized place into a center from where we see the oneness of things, because we are in touch with some aspect of that oneness, right? Whether it's love or truth or, you know, unity, or right? So that's the work. Basically, we need a spiritualized culture for all of humanity. And then that's how the tipping point will come, perhaps, the shift in consciousness.
Mm.
We just need many of us working at it. So at this point, I'm going to open it up for questions. And I also saw that there are some, we have about 15 minutes if people wish to stay on, and then I can close us out. But I saw there were a couple of comments here. Okay. Jan Shapiro says, because we are now in the age of Aquarius, the working out of the larger harmony, to quote Adi, also involves the knowledge being known not only to the high priests or rishis, but to the common people as well. Perhaps that partly answers Nilima's questions. How could this happen? How could India let go of her ancient knowledge? The time was not yet right for the fuller realization. Yes, there's also this concept of Kala from the Indic wisdom, right? Like you can have all the elements in place. You can have the guru, you can have the knowledge, you can have your own skill set and sadhana in place, but still it may not come to fruition because it's not yet time, right? Kala is that fourth, Kal, the time is the, the zeitgeist, so to speak, the time spirit, right? Has to also align. Actually, we didn't go there, so maybe I should, since he was popping into my head, tell me about Shani and Saturn in this context. Isn't he the one who kind of, Shani, the god, what is that connection to India and his role in India and this whole time and space and the capacity to kind of bring them together? Isn't that a Saturnian thing? Isn't that what Shani holds? And did Thea talk about Shani? I thought she did.
She refers often to Mahakal in this context, which is also Saturn. It's another name for Saturn, or it's Shiva's aspect as the time spirit, let's say.
Yeah.
So that's also Shani. And because, as we discussed yesterday, India and Capricorn share a really deep identity, Shani or Saturn is the ruler of Capricorn traditionally. So yes, and as that time spirit, because the energy of time, in a sense, is the binding energy of the soul of India. It's a very, one thing they are commenting on once is comparing it to ancient Egypt, where they built these vast monuments and aligned it to the millimeter with the North Pole, and like it was this conquest of the space dimension. India's genius has been in the time dimension. All of these, like you mentioned, that Panchang, and every day, has like a whole kaleidoscope of meanings every single day, because the whole year was the container for this transformative process. And yes, that Saturn, the god, the being that is embodied in that planet, represents that time spirit, Mahakal or Shani, that is the controller of destiny. And as you said, without the sanction of the time spirit, everything can be in place, but there needs to be also that convergence of time and destiny.
Wow. So there are some temples in Tamil Nadu that have indeed changed their sacred observations to now be based on the tropical, the Sayana zodiac, as a result of Thea's previous efforts in this regard. That's great to know. And it'll be nice to hear later about what are the results. Are they seeing a shift because of having made that decision in other aspects of life and so on? Again, Jan Shapiro, Thea also said, seeing is an act of creation. That's very beautiful. Can you elaborate on that, Adi?
Yeah, she often referred to what she called the act of seeing. So simply perceiving something not only clearly, but in its truth essence, releases an energy. And that release of energy has a creative impact on the surrounding circumstances, events, other people's consciousness. Just that act of clear seeing can set into motion a wave of events and change things.
Mm. Wow. So that's also reminding me of connecting it on a very real level, practical level in, this latest book of mine is called Healing Leaders, 7 Steps to Recovery of Self. And one of the things we talk about is that, you can tell a story through 3 lenses. It's the 3 seeings, 3 ways of seeing, right? You can tell it like you're the victim of what happened, or you can tell it like you're the hero of what happened, or then you can tell it as the learner of what happened, right? So I think what you have shared today, we can think of the 1500-year drift as an awful thing. And, we are victims of this. Or then we can say, oh no, but then we're fighting for it and it's going to change and, kind of make ourselves the heroes. And then there is the last invitation, which is, can we step back and see it through the lens of learners and say, why would this have been allowed by the divine, right? Is there a higher purpose to this? What is ours to learn and submit to and surrender and act on dharmically, right? I think those are wonderful questions to take away. How do we participate in an arc that seems to be stretching across millennia, and we get to live maybe 100 years max in a lifetime around? Like, what is ours to do in that short period, that little bubble of life, right? To course correct or to course forward, so to speak, right? So that's the other thought that's coming to me. What if this was Mother India's great sacrifice on behalf of a greater ideal? That what if this 1500-year drift, and knowing it will lead to a descent into break and chaos and all that, was also part of a divine sacrifice? Much like they say,
It reminds me of the close of the Mahabharata as well, because it's a similar thing. Krishna is saying, look, our time is up. Our time is up. It's time for this other thing to take place. And actually, it's a descent into darkness, and that's what was necessary, and brings us to these times as well, of now we're reclaiming in a more full way. Like Jan said, that we're entering into this age of universal transformation, as Thea called it, where everyone now has access to not only this information, but this opportunity to enter into this new creation and be part of this world of oneness and harmony.
I'm getting a bit emotional right now. Is this the dismembered goddess is such a theme, isn't it? In our psychology, in our mythology, it's deeply rooted in our psyche that for anything to grow and be born again calls for a sacrifice and a dismemberment of the body of the god or the goddess, whether it's Osiris in the Egyptian tradition or whether it is Sati, goddess Sati in the Indic tradition. The body of the divinity is dismembered as an act of sacrifice that can fertilize the greater whole. So is that what Mother India knew and participated in willingly? This drift that was to come, that would then lead to a greater fertilization and renewal. It's a sacrifice.
It's a powerful way to frame it.
We have some questions here with a piece of, it's been so useful listening to you, Adi, and, I'm sure many people have worked behind the scenes. So can you please give some information on where people can find Thea's books on the subject, and Are there any courses offered by the Aeon Center of Cosmology? How to contact ACC?
Yeah, so you can find us on our website, eoncenter.com. That's the British spelling of center, so TRE.com. And all of Thea's books are there. You can order them by phone or on the website, and we're happy to send them to you. And we are planning a course in the coming months on the introduction to applied cosmology. So you can also contact us on the website if you want to express your interest and be part of that. Be happy to hear from you. Or if you have any comments at all, just drop us a note on eoncenter.com.
Awesome. And we will put it in the description of the YouTube video when this goes out. So when they watch the recording, there'll be, we'll provide the links. If you share them with us, we will have that put up. So on that note, thank you so much, everybody. It's been absolutely delightful, not just from what I heard, but I know my body is filled with a certain essence that comes when I know I'm in the presence of the truth and beauty. I'm feeling that right now. I hope everyone on the call is feeling it, and that people who watch the recording will also receive this transmission. Jai Ma.
Thank you so much, Jai Ma. Thank you, everyone, for joining.
May this good work continue. May we bless the land of Kashmir. May the Kashmiri Pandit community find their purpose and their peace and their healing and reconciliation. Make the whole land and communities of Kashmir, because everyone has suffered in the last 30 plus years. So may their sacrifice not be in vain. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.
Night.